the eagles soar.
You think Jeff Sessions is a piece of work? You know who this is?
No. Is there not a better song about eagles?
This.
Who is this?
There's a legitimate issue here. If you look back at the last election, in which some of the Sanders supporters booed Hillary Clinton and booed supporters of proxies of Hillary Clinton. She was running against Donald Trump, and people from the Sanders team were booing candidates who didn't support Bernie. And it's just dangerous.
That doesn't happen with other candidates?
No.
Supporters?
Much less so. I think much less so. And this is what's going to hand Donald Trump the re-election. I would vote for Bernie over Donald Trump any day, and I think a lot of people would. But the reverse question has to also apply. Would Bernie supporters vote for other Democratic candidates? And if they wouldn't, then we've got a real problem on our hands. And Bernie and the country have a problem on their hands.
So before I jump in here, full disclosure, I am an occasional contributor to Bloomberg Opinion, but I still have plenty of opinions here on all of this. I thought the Bernie rally, you got to give it up for Bernie and his supporters. I mean, that was more like religious revival. The concern that I had watching it for that very thing that you're talking about, Congressman, is, look, some of the clips of the folks introducing him were so utterly lefty socialist. How more could you help Donald Trump be reelected? All they have to do is pick up some of those clips about socialism and just run those anytime he's talking about Bernie Sanders. I mean, that
were they straying from his platform or just using the S word where Bernie no longer says socialist?
Well, I mean, it was Shama Sawant.
Well, but it was heavy S word and sort of giving into that it's a narrow group. And you got to be very careful here, the Democrats do, because they're possibly heading for a brokered convention, which, has sometimes good results, but sometimes looks like chaos. And so if you have clips or just this image of how these folks were talking, they weren't really speaking like Democrats. They were speaking as socialists. Very concerning.
You have to ask yourself, when's the last time the Democrats elected a president or anybody elected a president on a platform of bashing the rich? Hasn't happened. There's a different way to get to the White House, and that's the top priority. I've got a piece coming out this weekend in the Seattle Times that basically says, look, we've got to deal with wealth inequality, and we've got to deal with opportunity for people who work hard but can't make ends meet. But bashing the rich doesn't solve that, especially...
Bernie did great in Washington State.
In the caucus.
But not in the primary.
250,000 people participated in the caucus, and he got 73% of the vote, but almost 4 times that participated in the primary.
1.4 million in the primary.
And he lost.
It's a different audience.
How about New Hampshire? I guess you'd expect.
I'm talking about 2016 in our state.
But so far so good for Bernie Sanders.
But the point
4 years later after, yes.
But if those are Pyrrhic victories, if this is not about winning, yes, I understand he wants to win the primary. Who wouldn't? But you got to win the general. And if doing what he does gets him the nomination but loses the presidency, thanks so much. And that's true of any candidate. And it's true of any supporter, by the way.
So Senator Elizabeth Warren's coming on Saturday to Seattle Center. What do you expect from that?
Well, so she's been here before, and she had a reasonably good-sized audience. I believe this is going to be a smaller audience just because of the venue. It's the Armory. So that's smaller. She'll do pretty well here. She had a good debate performance. She's coming off where she was pretty good in that debate, and Seattleites can be expected to show up in whatever numbers and be pretty supportive of her. I'd like to point out also that Pete Buttigieg was here in the last week, but he did the sort of, it's necessary. I understand he doesn't have enough money, but he did the sort of no because it was fundraiser only. And that really doesn't stir much excitement. The public barely knew he was here.
So far, remember when we said moving our primary earlier, which what Washington State is doing this year, is going to get more attention to Washington State causes. Is there any evidence that that's actually happening, other than candidates coming here and mostly giving their standard speeches?
That is the evidence. Mm-hmm. That is.
So what?
How
does that help
normally
the people
come here?
Yeah, but how does that help the people of Washington?
Well, makes them feel like they're part of it. Yeah. And if they do address our issues, that makes us matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you want candidates here. You want candidates having to read into your issues, having to understand. I mean, unless you're Amy Klobuchar and you're doing an interview with Noticias about, Mexico and you don't even know the Mexican president's name, I think most candidates would say, I'm coming to Washington. I'm going to look into and be prepared and know what matters to them. Bernie Sanders, he already uses Washington and Seattle policies as an example for things he wants to do federally, like raising the minimum wage. And so, I think it's good for our state to, if, you believe in those things and you're of that mindset, I think it's good for Washington state to have someone like Bernie Sanders, the Democratic frontrunner, holding you up as an example for what the rest of the country should be doing.
But that old saying of all politics is local. One of the mistakes the Democrats made in 2016 was not talking locally to the Rust Belt states, not even visiting, not showing up. When you go into it, whether it's the tiniest county in Washington state, you need to know what's happening in that tiny county. And when people come to our state, it behooves them, if they want to win, to understand Washington values, Washington issues. And I've been hearing far too many global stump speeches and far too little local messaging. And the Republicans, when they were debating, they talked locally. The number of times they would say Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, if you compared that to Hillary, they said it much more than Hillary did. And what was the outcome?
But Bernie's global message often uses the A word, Amazon. I mean, he's nationwide. He talks about Amazon. It's his number one foil.
But I think that's a mistake, because it's fun to bash Amazon or bash somebody else. But what does that do to actually solve the problems that the local community is facing?
Well, if you're a supporter of, if you want a Democratic candidate to win, wouldn't you rather have those candidates be in the swing states rather than wait in Washington state where the Democrat's going to win anyway?
Well, I mean, so you want to win as the Democrat in Washington state. Can you repeat that?
The Democrat is going to win the presidential election in Washington state.
Oh, you're talking about in the general election.
But they may not get the nomination if they don't get votes, if they don't get delegates from Washington, especially in a really close race.
You mentioned the Democrats going to primary this time. At the Bernie Sanders rally, Congressmember Jayapal mentioned that issue.
Now, Washington state, we have a primary coming up on March 10th. And it's our first primary. We used to have a caucus system, but this is a primary system. So we are going to need to educate everybody because our ballots come out on Friday. We need you to knock on every door, to talk to every person, to get your friends and family who didn't believe that there could be a president that really will fight for them. And we need them to turn out ballots. We need to deliver Washington state for Bernie Sanders.
So our ballots come out on Friday. They're not due until March 10th. That's a week after Super Tuesday. So if you're a savvy voter, do you wait until after Super Tuesday, hold on to that ballot to see which candidate still has the best chance?
Well, I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't, as long as you get that ballot in. And in fact, on my show coming up on Sunday, I have the state parties weighing in on this issue and the Secretary of State weighing in on this issue. And I don't think any of them want to tell people what to do. I mean, you might be a huge supporter of someone and you want to vote for them regardless. You don't even care if we've got Cory Booker on our ballot and he's long gone. And there might be people who still want to vote for Cory Booker because they're like, that was my person and I want the record to reflect that. But if you really want to have a say in the nominee, after Super Tuesday, it's very likely that there are going to be people who drop out. And so you could just wait a couple days and cast your vote for someone who's still in the race. But, of course, Democrats want to make sure that you definitely get that ballot in, so you can't hold on to it for too long.
I think most people probably will wait because they want to be, there's so many folks voting who want to be strategic, to impact this, to pick the winner, the likely winner and all of that. But one thing we need to caution everybody about our primary, it's the way we count votes around here. We're going to make Iowa look like they're fast at vote counting because we're very slow about it. Now, the party folks say, it's all about expectations. They know Washington state is slow, but not everybody thinks about it as often, realizes it as often as we do. And there will be frustration. If this is in any way close, maybe it's not expected to be, but if it's in any way close, they're going to keep going. And Washington said what? Because it's going to take a while.
Well, not only that, if the early voters vote for somebody who has then dropped out after Super Tuesday, you could see a big surge of somebody early on and then a big change because some of the candidates will have – it's almost like ranked choice voting in a way if you wait.
Right.
And also the word caucus has become kind of a swear word in case you haven't noticed it after Iowa. And Jay Inslee was in there saying, good thing we got rid of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let me say something quickly for Republicans. Do you have a lot of Republican listeners?
Tons.
All says there's this rumor that Republicans, because there's only Trump on the ballot, that they're going to use their primary vote to check the Democratic box and then to pick someone who they think is least likely to beat the president. Even the state party chair, Caleb Heimlich, on my show Sunday, acknowledges that he thinks that'll happen a little bit. However, he asked fellow Republicans not to do that. One, he said it's dishonest to do that, but also he made two good points. He said, one, if you're a Republican, you want to vote for Donald Trump, you need to make your vote count because it gives the president momentum. But also, if you want the president to come here and hold a rally, he's going to want to know that a lot of people came out and supported him in Washington state. So I thought it was great that the state Republican Party chair said explicitly it's dishonest to check the Democratic box and vote for someone for the purpose of trying to, throw the election.
And it's annoying to the parties for this reason, because one of their favorite things about the primary, the way it's going to be conducted, is you have to declare which party you are for that day. And that's like party on time for the parties, because they can't wait for these lists that they're going to get. And so if they get a bunch of Republicans, they're going to hound them.
I actually love that, because if you're gonna lie about it to throw the election, and you're a Republican and Trump supporter, and you're getting all these calls from the Democrats,
mail till you can't see straight from
just
the Democrats.
Desserts.
That's what's going to happen.
So ballots come out Friday for both Republicans and Democrats?
Well, yeah, they'll all come out at once.
And then they're not just in general, and they're not due until March 10th, a week after Super Tuesday. This is the Week in Review. We're going to come right back.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. Sound stories, sound voices. It's 12:22. Sunny is the forecast for this afternoon with a high of 53.
We live in a world of possibilities.
Let's talk about the possibility that Bernie Sanders doesn't get the nomination.
Knowing what will happen next starts with listening.
You're listening to NPR News.
And KUOW is where you'll hear trustworthy reporting about important issues in the upcoming election.
Should Washington voters be more worried about online elections? No.
Subscribe to our elections newsletter at KUOW.org/elections and be ready to act on November 3rd with Seattle's NPR news station. KUOW 94.9 and KUOW.org.
Support for KUOW comes from STG, presenting John Cameron Mitchell, bringing songs and stories from his musical Hedwig, as well as new originals with guest Amber Martin, live at the Moore on February 27th. Tickets and info at stgpresents.org.
You're with the Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke with former Congressman Brian Baird, and we have Brandi Kruse from Q13, Joni Balter from Civic Cocktail. This week, Seattle's Mayor Joni Durkan pronounced the state of the city to be, once again, strong and resilient. She referred to downtown crime, though, and she proposed a community response program.
This new program will dispatch trained, trusted community members to respond immediately after a shooting to hospitals, to neighborhoods, or hotspots. Their goal will be to calm tensions, support families and survivors.
Joni, how significant is that?
Look, every little bit helps here. Doesn't hurt. Every little bit helps. We have a pretty sour problem downtown. Lots of people trying to figure out, substantive ways to fix it. Some of the things that have been proposed, there's a mobile precinct down there, has a permanent parking place, was part of her speech as well. I mean, some of these things are unsustainable, and some of these things don't get at the long-term problem that we've had down there as long as I've lived here. It's the skid road of the modern era, and there's a lot of folks who think that we've really been ducking this for a long time. We haven't really hit it where it needs to go. Yes, that's a good idea to have folks prevent retaliation after a gang-related incident. Yes, that is. The additional police hours. There's many thousands of police hours. But can you sustain that? Can you really change what's going on down there? And as you know, some of the business folks are talking about spending like $40 million to sort of repurpose these streets. One of the problems down there is that these are the bus tunnel sort of changed the programming of the street and doesn't make it good for business.
The business group, the Downtown Seattle Association, has called for more police officers, government-run cameras, prosecutors who actually send criminals to jail, they say, more lights, trees, and welcoming storefronts. How significant is any of that?
Well, a few of those things need to be in totally separate categories, but when it comes to actual, so for instance, was it about 5 years ago, maybe less than that, when they did Operation Crosstown Traffic downtown, 9.5 blocks they went in, they swept out all the drug dealers, arrested people, and they made Westlake Park this nice area with a playground for kids and tables and games, and all of that is great, and I will say it made such a huge difference, but you actually didn't get rid of a lot of the issue, and it crept back up over time when they couldn't keep up emphasis patrols. People who would hang out in Westlake Park went elsewhere. So speaking to something Joni said is you need to make sure that whatever you do is sustainable, but definitely bringing in some environmental changes are good. You said prosecutors who actually send people to jail, which is a totally different beast altogether. There's a lot of issues at the ground level of this, repeat offenders that need to be addressed, but also the drug crisis. I mean, the DEA has this new thing that they're working on where they're putting more of a focus on drug trafficking and trying to stop all the meth from coming here in the first place. And I think this is a part of the topic that Seattle politicians and Washington politicians don't like to talk about. We're having this whole immigration debate and what's happening at the border. Look, we know where a lot of these drugs are coming from. They're coming from Mexico. And I get disappointed that topic is left out so much when we talk about border security and the fact that literally we need to be stopping drugs that are coming up from Mexico into our communities, killing people and causing so many of the issues downtown and the gang issues downtown. So there's a lot that needs to be done besides just beautifying the Pike Pine corridor.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself if it's just cosmetic, it's not going to make a difference. But the other reality, I have to applaud Mayor Durkan. I think at least she is acknowledging this is a serious problem that people don't feel safe in her city. And kudos, because it seems like for a long time many of us felt that City Hall was not clued into it, as if they didn't walk the streets that we all walk. So finding ways to get the real bad actors off the streets has to happen. People have to feel safe in their communities.
Well, I'll just disagree with one thing on that, because the mayor came out and the police chief came out the day after 8 people are gunned down on our streets and said Seattle's a safe city, as if anybody wanted to hear that or needed to hear that. And, we still have blood we're cleaning off the sidewalk. So while I think she understands the issue, there's always this desire to go back to comparing us to other places. We're supposed to be a world-class city. I don't want to be compared to Chicago or Baltimore or Detroit or whatever other cities you're using those statistics to compare us to. So until they can just let go of that and listen to people's fears and concerns and stop using numbers as a way to dismiss those things, I think they're completely missing the point. And I was glad she didn't say Seattle's a safe city at her State of the City address.
Yeah, excellent point.
What's amazing to me about all of this is we have so much gentrification and change going on block to block all through downtown and clearly South Lake Union. But for whatever reason, these blocks on this street in this area, they didn't change. How did all of it stay so similar? It doesn't make sense to me that all that change would have in many scenarios have swept away some of this activity. There is talk I'm hearing of some kind of a citizens initiative, not a money measure, which is, the number one choice in Seattle, but a citizens initiative that would be like, remember years ago when the police department declared that arresting people for marijuana was the lowest priority of the police department. This would make making downtown and other areas safer the top priority.
But what does that mean?
It just means you have to put the resources there. In other words, you're not asking for new money for resources. You have plenty of resources. You take those resources and you make sure that you're making downtown different than it is today.
Don't we also exaggerate how dangerous downtown is at the same time? I'm at the Second and Yesler every day, across from the Union Gospel Mission and Chief Seattle Club and the pawn shop behind me and the Quickie Mart and it's completely. I don't hear an argument there. I don't see the chaos. I'm not everywhere in downtown all the time, but it's just as true to say that we that our leaders underplay fear in Seattle, it's just as true to say that there's so much exaggeration of what a hellhole Seattle is.
Well, let's talk about the numbers, because crime is down citywide. It doesn't happen to be down in the downtown area. That's what's different. So people all have, crime is very much about perception, but you cannot, there's no way to pretty this up. You cannot have, shooting in your downtown area where people are commuting. I mean, that's just not a good look, and it's not going to become one.
Yeah, and I agree. Crime is relative. People's feelings of safety and security is relative. And I'll go back to what I said a couple minutes ago: is we are sold as and billed as a world-class city. And so when you go downtown, to me, when I go to Pike Place, when I go to Westlake, when I go to the waterfront, that doesn't look like a world-class city to me. And I'll also comment on how much we care about helping our homeless population. They are the ones being victimized the most in those areas and down by the courthouse. And you know how many times they probably report that to the police? Like none. And so I think we have a couple issues when it comes to the statistics. You have a lot of homeless people being victimized that aren't reporting it for whatever reason, mental health, drug abuse, whatever it is. And you also have a lot of people in the city who've stopped reporting petty crimes because the response rate just isn't there. And so that's why I just get so angry about numbers being referred to as it's supposed to be our perception of crime. And so numbers, to me, I don't like the numbers conversation.
Brandi, you used the term world class. And, if we compare ourselves to parts of San Francisco, Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, yeah, there's a lot of problems there. But when you go to lots of other cities in the world, you don't feel unsafe in the streets. Now, some of them have dictatorships, and that's a problem. But there are plenty of cities in the world where you walk and the streets are clean and people are polite and you feel safe and you're not panhandled and you don't have to step over tents and nobody's urinating on the sidewalk. And that's the other. If we make our benchmark so low and tolerate that, culturally, we're selling ourselves short. There are models where walking down the street in a major city is a very comfortable and safe experience. You don't feel alarmed.
I'll just tell an anecdote here. My former boss at the Seattle Times, the executive editor, Dave Boardman, was here in December, so well before the shooting happened. And he told me, he loves to walk the whole city. He walked the whole city. And it's kind of amazing. He said, I'm just telling you, I'm really worried about 3rd Avenue. And he walked it from Seattle Center to Pioneer Square. And he said, this street is trouble. It's not being well managed. And it was interesting to me because he had his finger on the pulse of the city, moved away and came back and said, yikes, what's going on there?
And the same is true sometimes when you take transit. You can be on a downtown transit bus and people get on and you say, dude, I don't feel safe with this person on this bus.
Yeah, and the city's like, take public transit. We want you to ride our buses. Well, make me feel like I'm not going to get stabbed on the bus and I'll ride it. And that might be an exaggeration for some. It depends what route you're taking. But I'll also note quickly, a couple weeks ago, I sat down with Duff Mckagan of Guns N' Roses, who's been a lifelong Seattleite, struggled with drug addiction in the early years when he was in L.A., lived out of his car for a brief period of time. He wanted to do an interview with me about downtown crime. And going back to something that, Brian, that you said is that, cities all over the world don't deal with these issues. And that was Duff's point, is that he's traveled the world in his rock band for 30 years, and Seattle's the only place where downtown he carries a knife. And he's got a plan, and he tells his daughters, if something happens, you run, I'll call the police. And he's so passionate about this because he's seen the city he loves devolve over the years. And I just wish more people like him in a position to really sound the alarm would be willing to speak out about it. I was just really impressed with his level of caring.
All right, you guys feel way less safe in Seattle than I do, but everyone's going to have their...
It's because you're wearing that shirt.
I don't know what major cities you go to where...
I lived in New York.
All right. Well, I'll leave that here for a moment. There's another city debate that we mentioned briefly last week, and some listeners said they wanted to hear more. This is the debate over Seattle's tree canopy, an issue that inspired a resident named Suzanne Grant to sing in City Hall.
Such a lack of life and sound. All that's left is bare, muddy ground. A magnificent tree was murdered. The mighty dollar cut it down. There's a hole in the sky where the tree once was. Somebody's making money. Stand up. There's a hole.
Brandi, you're conducting the orchestra here. You're singing, actually.
It's so catchy.
What are they singing
This was one
about?
of my favorite things, honestly, to ever happen at a city council meeting. And Jason Rantz, who's a friend of mine, he works at KTDH. He's a conservative radio host. He said it showed that like Seattle's full of like nut jobs. And I was like, I disagree.
Oh.
This is, listen, and Seattle might have some odd ducks around, but the amount you have to care to show up at a committee meeting of the Seattle City Council. What is this, the Land Use and Neighborhoods Committee?
Yeah, that's a snooze.
That's a snooze fest, let's be honest. The amount you have to care to show up at that meeting. Did she write this song? Is this an original song?
I think it is. I don't know where he's coming from with nut job. They're talking about updating Seattle's tree ordinance, and she's just making a presentation about that is memorable.
She sings this song. She gets her friends to join in chorus, and I love that about Seattle. I love that people care so much. So basically what she wanted them to do is pass this tree ordinance that would stop, so many of our beautiful trees in the city from being cut down for development.
Require developers to replace, especially large trees that they remove. Enforce rules. We had this complaint-based system where trees can just be gone, whether it's permitted or not, before you can stop it.
I absolutely loved the singing, and it was such a Seattle thing to do. Just the way they were dressed, they had tree gear on their heads.
One of them
and
did,
everything.
anyway.
I mean, I love that. What we have here is environmentalists bumping into environmentalists. We cannot have a city that keeps gentrifying, upzoning, and keep the tree canopy that we have. And tree canopies are very helpful for climate change. And so you really do, and this just reminds
The density
me,
is helpful for climate change, too.
Exactly. So that's why they're all bumping into each other. This, again, speaks to the unholy alliance, in my mind, between developers and environmentalists. Upzone, where are you taking the trees from? The trees are coming sometimes from single-family homes. And so how do you replace that? That's the question here.
The one caveat I'll say is somebody's had trees fall all over his neighborhood. It is possible, certainly up at Edmonds where I live, the tree ordinance can make it very, very difficult to remove trees that are a danger to public safety. And that needs to be, you have to be cautious about that. Right? Making sure we have a good tree canopy, I'm all for it. But if something threatens the safety of a house or a family, then you got to have a way without going through mountains of bureaucracy and denial. It's almost like until it falls, we can't remove it. Well, that's kind of dicey.
I don't want to misquote Jason Rantz. He said Seattle activists are certifiable. That was the quote.
What is that? What's that
give
mean?
me a break, Jason. Give me a break. That's silly. I like the tree canopy, and a tree attacked my house in a windstorm about 2 or 3 years ago. Came very close from taking out the whole front part.
Yeah,
but
that gets your attention.
Does
When
wake
your
you
kids
up.
are sleeping in
Although
the
it took
bedroom.
me like 2 hours to figure out that was what happened. I didn't even hear it.
So is the city council going to change the tree ordinance?
I genuinely don't know what happened with that. I know that Andrew Lewis said he was looking forward to the debate on it. So
Well,
I guess I was so wrapped up in the song.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a couple of the new city council members, Dan Lewis,
Alex Peterson,
Dan Strauss and Andrew Lewis.
Dan Strauss.
I was going to do
I
that.
know.
And they've talked. They spoke on Civic Cocktail about how they are in fact interested in saving some trees, which
Just
is good.
Make it practical. Make it practical.
All right. We're going to pause on Week in Review. When we come back, we will take a moment to mourn some legislative ideas that didn't make it, but beware the zombie as well. You never know. Stay tuned to the Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from Alex the Cat Groomer. Featured on NPR's All Things Considered, Alex the Cat Groomer has been providing cat grooming services to nonprofit rescue groups since 2010, with the belief that unconditional love deserves a second chance. Full list of services at alexthecatgroomer.com.
I don't know how close to get to that camera to make it clear what's on my shirt. Am I too close at this point?
It's just hard to imagine. You've got these
But what are they? Exactly.
Well, no, they're giraffes, right? They're purple giraffes.
They might be. Brandi brought peacocks into the discussion. I'm not here to tell you what it's not. I think what you believe is on my shirt. By the way, my point is that we're streaming live on Facebook.com, so you can watch the show too. But even if you're just listening, I'll tell you, it's Brandi Kruse from Q13, former Democratic U.S. Representative Brian Baird, and Seattle Channel's Joni Balter, talking about the news of the week. And on this show, we tell you when a new idea comes along. A lawmaker has introduced a brand new bill, but I think it's time we talk about the reality that most bills are not destined to live forever.
I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I'm still just a bill.
Brian Baird, you used to be on Capitol Hill. So which Olympia bill funeral most moved you?
Well, the issue of limiting ammunition clips, the size of ammunition clips, I was good friends with Gabby Giffords.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that has stopped some mass shootings has been the need to reload. And it's tragic. I mean, it gives you a tiny window in which you could take somebody down. And, the received wisdom now is that instead of just duck and cover and hide and wait to have somebody shoot you like a sitting duck, if there's an active shooter, you go to the shooter. And I've told my kids, I hate this. I have to tell my kids when they were in elementary school, if there's a shooter and I'm here in the school, you run away, Dad will go take out the shooter. Well, my chances, I'll still do that, but my chances go down if he or she doesn't have to reload. And it's just inexcusable that we can't say there's a limited number of rounds. As a hunter, you don't need 20, 30 rounds to drop an animal.
Unless you're a really bad hunter.
Yeah, if you do, then you need to do some target practice.
So why, with the Democratic House, Senate, and governor, does a gun magazine restriction to 10 or 15 rounds not pass?
Well, so it's important to understand that they still have to go through a process. And so in this case, you had, you had Republicans who introduced a bunch of amendments, and there was a tight deadline. There was a very strict Wednesday at 5 p.m. deadline, and I want to say there was like 120 amendments. Is that egregious? Something like that Republicans introduced. And so, it would have taken much longer to get through those than the deadline allowed for.
How does this work? Are these amendments that are just word salad, or are they actually relevant amendments?
Well, I think you'll probably have a mix of both. I don't know that Republicans would argue with. So when it didn't meet the deadline, Attorney General Bob Ferguson essentially said that Republicans filibustered it, was the word he used. So I think you probably have a little bit of both. Some actual policy things that Republicans want to change, and maybe some things meant to delay.
Can I just say that state lawmakers are really bad at passing gun legislation, and that is why Washington has become a sort of national leader in passing citizens' initiatives to get done what the legislature won't do. And you can predict here pretty easily that if an assault weapons ban is the desired next move, that it'll come to us the way many other measures in recent years have come to us on gun safety, by citizens' initiative. And by the way, the lawmakers know that. So when they feel like not taking the vote, they go, well, let the Alliance for Gun Responsibility and some of their supporters figure out how to get it on the ballot.
Well, guess what? Breaking news as we're taping this show. Remember I said before going into this segment that beware the zombie, because dead bills do get revived. I'm just seeing that the gun magazine limit has been revived in the form of a new bill proposed by state Democrats, a brand new House bill limiting magazines to 15 rounds instead of 10 from the same sponsor. The new version, unlike the original bill, includes a buyback program that would allow people to turn in up to 5 large magazines in exchange for money. Washington State Patrol would run the buyback program similar to what they did when the state recently banned bump stocks.
Yeah, and so
Makes
for
sense.
people who are confused as to why something can die and then be revived, the Wednesday 5 p.m. cutoff applies to bills that don't have an impact on the budget. And so by inserting language, it's almost like a technical change where they can make it apply to the budget such that it's not beholden to that Wednesday deadline. So
What doesn't apply to the budget?
well, I mean, I guess there's some things. If with the magazines, if you're not doing any sort of buyback, it has nothing to do with the money that you're going to give people. I mean, you're just saying you can't have these.
Right.
So technically, you're not working it into a sort of budget scenario.
Interesting.
What'll be interesting to see is what is the response to the amendment. That's a pretty reasonable amendment. That's a lot of rounds. If you've got something you already own, nobody's saying we're going to take it and not compensate you. So that's a reasonable amendment.
Yeah, and I will say, as far as a high-capacity magazine goes, gun people don't consider 15 rounds or 10 rounds to be high capacity. They probably consider 30-plus to be high capacity. I'm curious whether the bill, obviously it has to exempt law enforcement, correct? Do we know that yet? I don't know whether the new version, I mean, it obviously has to exempt law enforcement because a lot of their standard issue guns, they're going to have far more than 15 round
Well, SWAT
magazines.
teams will be exempt from this, I'm sure.
What about giving the felons the right to vote? Again, Democratic legislature, why are we not expanding the voter rolls to include felons?
So this is one that had sort of squishy support to start with. And then there were some very creative, or that's their job to have important amendments. There were a lot of amendments on this, and they simply ran out of time. And so that didn't make it. Makes perfect sense in a Democratic legislature, but they really didn't have enough support even going into it.
But one of the things that's interesting to me, Joni, is that this is an issue where there has been some really intriguing cross-aisle and cross-ideology support nationwide. Koch brothers and others have partnered with progressive Democrats to say incarcerating so many people and depriving them of the right to vote is a mistake, and yet we don't seem to have that happening here.
Well, and can I just lump this conversation together with the gun control conversation really quick and make a point about policies here. There is this, talking about new gun control legislation, like using one of the downtown shooters as an example. 4 hours before the shooting, he went to a gun shop. Even though he's prohibited from owning a firearm, he went to the gun shop to buy a 10-round magazine clip for his, I think it was like a 38 caliber or something. And so people are going to point to that and say, well, see, like had we had this high-capacity magazine limit, he wouldn't have been able to buy this thing. He would have maybe got fewer shots off. But you're also talking about these two shooters who have dozens and dozens of criminal convictions. And one of them, had been convicted of unlawful possession of a firearm in the second degree. You know what he got for that? 3 months. He got 3 months on his sentence. It's within the standard range, but I'll tell you what, if I'm a gang member and I'm thinking about whether I want to possess a firearm unlawfully, I am a lot less likely to do that if I'm going to get 5 years in jail as opposed to 3 months. So as a state that cares so much about gun control, we are consistently giving gun offenders slaps on the wrist. Actual criminals who do criminal acts with firearms, slaps on the wrist, while you're looking to put new restrictions on people who have done nothing but enjoy their Second Amendment right and have never done anything unlawful or improper with a firearm. And so I think you'd have more support from the other side. And I'm going to bring this back to felon voting rights. I think you'd have more support from the other side if the gun law is already on the books, the common sense ones, like having a punishment for being a felon in possession of a firearm. You'd have a lot more cross-aisle cooperation if you showed them that you actually cared about gun crimes. And that brings me back to the felon voting issue. When you commit a felony, it's a serious offense. I have felons in my family, and I'll tell you what, they deserved to have their voting rights revoked for a little bit. And so there's this question about, punishments for being a not so great member of society at times. Absolutely. The members of my family who have been through that, do I think that they have been rehabilitated and they are now contributing members of society that might deserve to have some of those things back? 100%. But I'll tell you what, not being able to vote was part of the lesson that they got for what they did. And so I think this desire constantly in this state to give people slaps on the wrist for things that we say we care about, is a
Okay,
little
any-
disingenuous.
Well,
Response before we move on?
you could absolutely see a successful bill on felon voting rights, and if you work on it on the other end, because there have been folks who are not supposed to have guns. This has happened repeatedly, and when they're found with them, they don't get enough penalty, not enough to make
Such a no-brainer.
make any lessons stick.
Okay, whatever legislators want to do in Olympia, they've got more money to do it now. The new forecast shows state revenue growing by $600 million more than it was already expected to grow. Why is that?
So it's kind of like when it rains, it pours. This happens when you have revenue shortfalls. You'll get one, followed by another, and this state is booming right now. There's no doubt about it. So we consistently keep getting revenue excess, and so that's a good time in a legislature. I think it's one of the reasons that Governor Jay Inslee thought that the state could finally step in and be very impactful on homelessness this year. In his original budget proposal, he had, I think it was $300 million for state investment in it. He's not the only governor that's doing that. California Governor Gavin Newsom gave his State of the State this week, and he mostly talked about the need for the state of California to step in and help with homelessness. So we're flush. We have money. We can do things.
Well, or we can be wise and save it when the recession hits.
That's the other alternative.
We are overdue for a recession. The combination of coronavirus, there's a number of factors, the federal debt, a number of factors may be bumping us towards that. And if you are going to invest in things like infrastructure, invest after the recession hits so you can put people back to work and you get more bang for your buck. And so the one thing I would sure hope is let's not just pop the champagne corks and start spending wildly. Let's set some of it aside for when we
Well, but if we're talking about if the state is going to, popping a champagne cork is one way to look at it, but if the state is going to help, as Joni mentioned, somebody get off the street or educate a child or train someone for a job, whatever, don't they want to do those investments as soon as possible? Because first of all, human suffering doesn't wait, and also investments in people, if they're investments, then you do them now and then they pay off later, right?
That makes sense, Bill. And if you want to invest in, say, early childhood education, I had a great conversation yesterday with former Mayor Tim Burgess, and he's doing some marvelous work, as are others, to get early childhood education. There are other states where 3- and 4-year-olds have access to early education. That's the kind of investment you want to make, but you want to make sure the dollars go where they're going to have the most near and long-term effect.
Can I just argue that they have enough to actually put some in the rainy day fund and invest? They have enough this time to do that. Now, some Republicans have come along and said give it back in the form of a tax break. I don't see a lot of passion for that right now with limited time, but that's another alternative.
Democrats aren't going to do that.
Clearly.
What do you expect?
But yeah, we have a lot of revenue in the state. We have a lot of money to be able to do things that are important, to be able to cover all of that. And, to Brian's point about, you don't get your tax refund and then go out and buy, the most expensive car you can because all of a sudden you've got a little boost. You don't expand your monthly budget. And so, similar situation. Hopefully they can put some of it away.
Yeah, if you look at it as spending as champagne and fancy cars, then I guess that will guide your thinking. But there's also the human suffering and investment way of looking at state.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But the suffering gets magnified for the people who suffer in the time of a recession. That suffering is worse, and then you have less reserve. So spending some now to help make sure every kid gets an early childhood education, absolutely. Some infrastructure, some conservative energy projects, fine. But you just have to, as Joni said, if you've got something, make sure it's being wisely spent because the numbers of people who come to your office and ask for more money is endless.
Yeah. Because it might mean you can do more now, but what if it also means by not saving, you do less than we're doing now down the road?
Right.
Speaking of taxes, how long has it been since we played catchy music? Has it been seems like 10 minutes.
Since the singer at the...
Okay, because who can tell me why I'm playing a Coca-Cola ad on a public radio station?
Because they're going to start selling more seltzer because the beverage tax and just regular public behavior is changing.
Seattle's had a sugary beverage tax for 2 years now. And we just this week we found out that sugary beverage sales at Seattle stores dropped about 30%.
But I think that's I'm not averse to that. Actually, my wife's kind of a champion in that in her line of work. But when I first encountered that, I'm a psychologist by training, and what happens is you take the beverage, you get it to the counter, and then you pay more than you thought you were going to have to pay. That's not effective behavioral. If you want to tell me, hey, there's a 30% surcharge on this beverage before I buy it, but there's less surcharge on that beverage, then I'm making an informed consumer choice. But if I don't have that information before I get to the checkout, you may see this change, but it may not be because of price.
It might just be dumb luck here, because the fact is that consumer habits are changing.
That's right.
The companies know that. People are learning that pouring down sugary drinks all day is not a healthy thing to do.
It's terrible for you.
It's terrible for you. And so, believe me, the beverage companies know this. That's why they're selling all these different, 50 flavors of seltzer and that kind of stuff.
Speaking of the stuff that we consume, let's talk about a champion consumer. This is the United States of America, and you don't talk bad about this predator and scavenger.
Let the eagles soar.
You think Jeff Sessions is a piece of work? You know who this is?
No. Is there not a better song about eagles?
This.
Who is this?
This is George W. Bush's Attorney General, John Ashcroft, singing his own composition about the noble bird soaring on the great seal of the United States, an olive branch in one claw and arrows in another. In the 1970s, eagles were a double symbol. They were a symbol of American magnificence and a symbol of environmental ruin, because this bird was almost wiped out by pesticides. Then came the Endangered Species Act, and the bald eagle was protected to the point where today they're considered a nuisance, especially in Alaska, where the port town of Unalaska produced a video warning about an eagle infestation. And it sounded like this.
Doing something as simple as mailing a letter can be dangerous. Eagles have been known to swoop down and attack people. They're very territorial, and they're just trying to protect their nests. The eagle's nest is right there, and here is the post office. Some people have been hurt during these incidents, but I've also heard some funny stories.
I was carrying this box. It had some of my bingo stuff in it. All of a sudden, a wing hit my head, the talons came down, grabbed the box, and flew down the street, and I never saw my bingo box again.
Bingo!
Every time we pull in, we know the eagles are waiting for us so they can steal our fish as we offload it. Do I think they're pests? Oh, absolutely. But they're cool pests, so that's okay.
There we go.
They make a mess of my boat, which is kind of the bad part, but they are a national bird, and we love them anyway. How's that?
That was vivid. It was vivid. Now the comeback of the eagle is happening in the lower 48. This week, the Seattle Times reported King County wants a permit to scare away scavenging eagles that swarm the county landfill, pick up trash, and drop it in neighbors' yards. That's right. You need a permit to harass eagles using fireworks. Bird bangers, screamer sirens, whistlers. And by the way, this federal permit would also allow King County to kill bald eagles, though the county says it has no intention of using that power.
I knew that was coming. Yeah. I just knew that was coming.
Train the eagles to hunt sea lions.
They're helping out the salmon that the eagles would otherwise be preying on.
Yes.
So one of the most interesting dynamics is the cozy relationship, not so cozy, between crows and eagles. I mean, they just have at each other. I never understood how a crow would, feel strong and tough enough to go after an eagle. But when you see them, it's groups of crows going after the eagle and back and forth and back and forth.
I just think that there's nothing more American than this. I just want to know when they're using the fireworks so I can sit there and watch the fireworks go off as the eagles fly away.
Yes, the rocket's red glare actually defeating the symbol of America. Right. All right, well, I don't know if the county's going to, the county could just pay garbage collectors to pick up the odd eagle drop trash and let the birds live, because we're kind of in their backyard, but we'll see. We'll see whether the county gets this permit. This is Joni Balter, host of Civic Cocktail on Seattle Channel. Brian Baird, former Democratic U.S. Representative from the 3rd District, Southwest Washington, and Brandi Kruse, correspondent at Q13 and host of The Divide on Sunday morning. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.
Let the eagle
Let it soar, John.
Like she's never soared